The flute. The flute is the instrument that serves as the soprano voice in most bands, orchestras, and woodwind groups. Most flutes are made of metal and consist of a tube with a mouthpiece near one end. The musician holds the flute horizontally and blows across an oval-shaped hole to produce sound. At the same time, the musician presses keys on the flute, which produces different notes depending on the fingerings. The flute can play 3 octaves, and other members of the flute family include the piccolo, the alto flute, and the bass flute. Background. The flute has been around for millennia. It can be argued that the flute is one of the world's oldest known instruments. Civilizations around the world have recorded using the flute for thousands of years. This instrument has been tested throughout time, crossing geographical and ethnic boundaries along the way. The Bible talks about pipe instruments like the flute in Genesis 4:21. It is here that we read about the beginnings of musical instruments. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all who played stringed instruments and pipes. The oldest known flute is from Asia. It is made out of bamboo and is between 9,000 and 9,500 years old. The oldest flute that has been found in Western Europe is around 8,000 years old and is made out of bone. This flute, although crude in its design, can play an 8-note range, which is pretty good considering all the advances the instrument has made over the years since then. In the Americas, the flute is relatively new compared to its counterparts in Western Europe and Asia. The oldest known example found here is around 5,500 years old. This flute was found in Lasson's Armour burial mound in Newfoundland and Labrador. There are just a few examples of flutes found in the Americas made before the arrival of the Europeans. However, there are a lot of records in the journals of European explorers showing an advanced version of the flute in the 18th century. Historians and archaeologists alike know that the flutes described in these journals were made by the Indians, and so they concluded that for such an advanced version of the flute to be noted in the 18th century, there must have been a long period of tweaking of the flute to get it to this point, as is found in Western Europe and Asian history.
Medieval flutes. The flute appears in pictures and poetry beginning in the 12th century and seems to have been used in German courts where it played with harp, fiddle, and rote. There is no definite information about the construction, repertoire, or playing technique of the instrument in these early times, because no standard form of the flute existed. The construction of the flute varied depending on what country it was made in, and since music was not usually written down, it is difficult to know what music they played. The flute became much better known in Europe in the 14th century, as German-speaking peoples used the flute for marching and signaling in the military. 17th century flutes. Originally, the flute had been meant to just play one octave and not to stand out on its own. The new solo music created in the 1600s called for instruments with a more individual sound, including a stronger lower range and being able to play loud or soft dynamics. These new flutes were used by court musicians playing for Louis XIV of France, where they were often played in private concerts in the chambers of the king and his courtiers. They played simple folk songs and often performed with singers, lutes, and sometimes other instruments. The flute was considered a sweet instrument used to express feelings of love. Baroque flutes. The first solo music for flute was composed by famous composers such as Telemann, Handel, Bach, and Vivaldi, as well as many other composers. Many cities began to manufacture flutes as the instrument became more popular. Flutists were often featured at concerts in major cities, and famous players began to travel to other cities and countries to perform as soloists. By about 1800, nearly all professional players used keyed flutes, which enabled the flutist to play more notes. Since then, continual changes have been made to the flute, more notes being added, more padded keys, and different kinds of tones being produced. Flutes in ancient tales. Tales of different kinds, folk and fairy tales alike, have been around for centuries. One of the earliest and best known tales is that of the Pied Piper. This story comes out of Germany in the 13th century AD, and it is in this story that the flute plays an important role.
The Pied Piper by the Brothers Grimm. Once upon a time, on the banks of a great river in the north of Germany lay a town called Hamelin. The citizens of Hamelin were honest folk who lived contentedly in their gray stone houses. The years went by and the town grew very rich. Then one day, an extraordinary thing happened to disturb the peace. Hamelin had always had rats, and a lot too, but they had never been in danger, for the cats had always solved the rat problem in the usual way, by killing them. All at once, however, the rats began to multiply. In the end, a black sea of rats swarmed over the whole town. First they attacked the barns and storehouses, then for lack of anything better, they gnawed the wood, cloth, and anything at all. The one thing they didn't eat was metal. Terrified citizens flocked to plead with the town councilors to free them from the plague of rats. But the council had, for a long time, been sitting in the mayor's room trying to think of a plan.
What we need is an army of cats.
But all the cats were dead.
We'll put down poisoned food then.
But most of the food was already gone, and even poison did not stop the rats.
It just can't be done without help,
said the mayor sadly. Just then, while the citizens milled around outside, there was a loud knock at the door.
Who can that be?
The city fathers wondered uneasily, mindful of the angry crowds. They gingerly opened the door. To their surprise, there stood a tall, thin man dressed in brightly colored clothes with a long feather in his hat and waving a gold pipe at them.
I've freed other towns of beetles and bats,
the stranger announced.
And for 1,000 florins, I'll rid you of your rats. 1,000 florins?
Exclaimed the mayor.
We'll give you 50,000 if you succeed.
At once the stranger hurried away, saying,
It's late now, but at dawn tomorrow, there won't be a rat left in Hamelin.
The sun was still below the horizon when the sound of pipe wafted through the streets of Hamelin. The Pied Piper slowly made his way through the houses, and behind him flocked the rats. Out they scampered from doors, windows, and gutters, rats of every size, all after the piper. And as he played, the stranger marched down to the river and straight into the water, up to his middle. Behind him swarmed the rats, and everyone was drowned and swept away by the current. By the time the sun was high in the sky, there was not a single rat in the town. There was even greater delight in the town hall, until the Pied Piper tried to claim his payment.
50,000 florins?
Exclaimed the councilors.
Never! 1,000 florins at least!
Cried the Pied Piper angrily, but the mayor broke in.
The rats are all dead now, and they can never come back. So be grateful for 50 florins, or you'll not get even that.
His eyes flashing with rage, the Pied Piper pointed a threatening finger at the mayor.
You'll bitterly regret ever breaking your promise,
he said, and vanished. A shiver of fear ran through the councilors, but the mayor shrugged and said excitedly,
We've saved 50,000 florins.
That night, freed from the nightmare of the rats, the citizens of Hamelin slept more soundly than ever. When the strange sound of piping wafted through the streets at dawn, only the children heard it. Drawn as by magic, they hurried out of their homes. Again the Pied Piper paced through the town. This time it was children of all sizes that flocked at his heels to the sound of his strange piping. The long procession soon left the town and made its way through the wood and across the forest till it reached the foot of a huge mountain. A great landslide came down the mountain, blocking the entrance to the cave forever. Only one little lame boy escaped this fate, and it was he who told the anxious citizens searching for their children what had happened. No matter what people did, the mountain never gave up its victims. Many years were to pass before the merry voices of other children would ring through the streets of Hamelin, but the memory of the harsh lesson lingered in everyone's heart, and was passed down from father to son through the centuries.